Hello, my name's Ivana Hernandez. As my topic, I chose to focus on racial injustice, which led me to pick the BLM social movement. Before I can get into this, I want to define racism so you could understand where I'm coming from. So, on this slide, it says, "What is racism?" And I have chosen a quote by Audre Lorde, which states, "It is not our differences that divide us, it is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences." I have taken two definitions from well known dictionaries and the definition that my 12-year-old cousin gave me. From Oxford Languages, it states prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against a person or people of the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is minority or marginalized. Merriam Webster says a belief that a race is fundamental determinant of a human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. And my 12-year-old cousin told me judging someone based off their skin color. The most earliest record of racism was in the beginning of the 17th century, when European people colonized the northern part of America. Later on, the creation of social practices and discriminatory laws were at play, targeting many groups, and the biggest being dark skinned people. North America was inhabited by Native Americans. Upon Europeans' arrival, the Europeans believed that the Native Americans were savages who needed to be civilized by the Europeans' traditions and culture. This led up to genocide. Europeans murdered Native Americans by the hundreds. Not only were they trying to steal their land, but also completely erase their traditions. The only way that Native Americans could live was to submit to the conquerors. Even after many years, the practice of enslaving darkskins came to no end. Rich, successful, and African Americans with titles were stripped from their names and were placed in slave trades. African Americans were sold as slaves, used for working or other things. Most of the owners would beat them by using whips with sharp stones attached to the end. When whipped, the sharp ends would dig into the slave's back, and when the whip was pulled back, it would create large gashes. If those wounds were not treated properly, many died from the infections. If the darkskins were not slaves, they were still treated without any human decency. Even after slavery was abolished, it did not mean that they were entirely free. A new type of segregation was created, and the saying separate but equal. The whites and blacks had different living areas, restaurants, drinking fountains, schools, bus seatings, bathrooms, jobs, and many more things. There were laws created against those with dark skins. The Jim Crow laws enforced racial segregation in the South of the United States, and the Grandfather Clause allowed men to vote if their ancestors voted before 1867. This did not help any African Americans at all because all their ancestors were slaves. Now, I want to talk about white privilege, but before that, here's a definition that I've taken from Oxford Languages. Inherent advantages possessed by a white person on the basis of their race in a society characterized by racial inequality and injustice. This quote I have taken from Rendy Endo Lodge. White privilege is an absence of the consequences of racism. White privilege is a difficult topic to talk about. Many white people don't think that they have any privilege because most of them don't feel powerful enough to even obtain it. The clearest and easiest way that I'm able to understand white privilege is that white people are that, just people. And those who do not have white skin are different members of a race. So every single white person has some sort of power. It just depends how well they use it. The George Floyd case. George Floyd was trying to buy a pack of cigarettes from a store called Cup Foods in Minnesota. The employee believed that Floyd was trying to use a counterfeit bill and called the police. Minutes later, the police showed up and the officer Thomas Lane took out his gun and pointed it at Floyd. After they got Floyd out of the car, Officer Chauvin proceeded to push him on the ground and place his knee on his neck, which caused him unable to breathe. Multiple times Floyd stated that he could not breathe, and minutes later he was unresponsive. Bystanders pleaded to check his pulse, and the officer could not find it. While they were checking for a pulse, Chauvin still had his knee on George Floyd's neck. Floyd was taken to a medical center in an ambulance and was pronounced dead an hour later. BLM stands for Black Lives Matter. It is a social movement that is dedicated to fighting racism and police brutality against black people. It's bringing the voices of those who have been discriminated because of their race. It's fighting for the basic thing that everyone should have: human rights. George Floyd became the face that fueled this movement. This movement wasn't just local or national. It was and still is a global protest. Many people all around the world have attended a protest. Jobs were closed, police buildings were destroyed. Even Anonymous, a decentralized group who is known for cyber attacks, had something to say about the murder of George Floyd. They even took down the Minneapolis Police Department website. Some pros of the BLM movement are awareness. It raised awareness of those of dark skin that have been a victim of prejudice and have been blamed for most of the crime rates. It brought together those who were treated poorly and those who believed in justice to fight for equality together. And it brought those to fight for justice. White people also attended the BLM protest and used their privilege in a way that aided those of dark skins. There were some cons that were produced. Officers experienced violent attacks. Violent protests were held where citizens and officers were injured. Buildings were burned and the safety of going outside diminished. Some people were taking advantage of the chaos and started raiding stores, which made the movement seem violent instead of fighting for justice peacefully. It made an excuse for the cameras to focus on black people raiding stores than those who were protesting. This brought awareness to many of those who did not believe that racial injustice was real. What I'm about to say will be completely my opinion, so it is biased. Donald Trump is viewed as a racist, and the reason why many elderly people vote for him is because of that fact. With the BLM movement that happened beforehand, many decided not to vote for him, instead to vote for Joe Biden. I assume that this is one reason why Joe Biden won against Donald Trump in the elections. And in some states, they have banned chokeholds and have reviewed the police reforms so this does not occur again. I believe that because of this movement, it has created a pathway for us to move ahead and create a better future for people. ALM, which stands for All Lives Matter, was also used in many discussions. It stated that we shouldn't just focus on one race, but on all races because all lives should matter. But that is very narrow-minded because all lives cannot matter until Black lives matter. They have faced the most discrimination. Yes, Indians, Mexicans, Asians, and many other races have also been discriminated, but not as badly as the black people have. Unless Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter cannot happen, because black people are people too.